She called the cops on me for watering my flowers. Said I was trespassing on my own property. Had me nearly arrested right there in my front yard. She thought she had all the power. Thought that thick folder of HOA rules made her untouchable. Thought she could bully me like she'd bullied every other homeowner in the neighborhood. But Patricia Moreland made one critical mistake. She assumed I was just another victim she could push around. She didn't know I'd spent 32 years as a circuit court judge. She didn't know I'd written half the property law rulings in this state. And she definitely didn't know that her precious HOA covenant was about to fall apart. This is the story of how an HOA president tried to destroy me, and how I dismantled her entire operation, one illegal rule at a time. I was watering my roses when I heard her voice cut through the peaceful morning air like a chainsaw. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I looked up from my garden bed, water still trickling from the hose in my hand. A woman in her mid-50s was marching across my front lawn, her heels sinking into the grass with each aggressive step. She wore a crisp white blazer and carried a leather-bound folder like it was some kind of weapon. Behind her, two other people followed, one holding what looked like a camera. "I'm watering my flowers," I said calmly, turning off the nozzle. "On a Tuesday morning," which is a violation of Section 4.7 of the HOA covenant. She jabbed her finger at me like I'd committed murder. Water usage is restricted to Thursdays and Sundays only. I'd lived in this neighborhood for exactly 3 weeks. 3 peaceful weeks after 32 years on the bench as a circuit court judge. I'd retired at 65, bought this modest home in what I thought was a quiet community, and planned to spend my days tending to the garden I'd never had time for. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent 3 decades interpreting property law, municipal codes, and yes, even HOA regulations and disputes that came before my court. "I wasn't aware of that rule," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Ignorance is not an excuse," she snapped back. "I'm Patricia Moreland, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, and you are in direct violation of our community standards." She opened her folder with a dramatic flourish. "This is your second violation this month." "Second?" I raised an eyebrow. "Your mailbox was reported as being 2 inches lower than regulation height last week," she said, running her finger down a printed page. "And now this flagrant water waste." The person behind her was definitely recording this on their phone now. I noticed a small badge on their shirt that said, HOA Compliance Officer. "I see," I said quietly. Something in my tone must have irritated her because her face flushed red. "You're new here, so let me make this crystal clear," Patricia said, stepping closer. "In Willow Creek, we maintain standards. We have rules, and those rules apply to everyone, no exceptions." She emphasized the last 2 words like she'd given this speech before. Probably had, if I was being honest. "I just wanted to keep my roses alive," I said, gesturing to the flower bed. "They're still establishing their root systems." "Then you should have read the covenant before you moved in," she replied coldly. "The rules are the rules, Mr." She glanced at her folder. "Mr. Harrison, I'll make sure to water on the appropriate days going forward," I offered, trying to de-escalate. But Patricia wasn't interested in de-escalation. "Too late for that," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've already violated the terms. That's a $200 fine for the first water violation, added to the $100 fine for the mailbox. $300 for watering flowers and a mailbox that's 2 inches off." I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "The covenant is binding," she said, tapping the folder. "You signed it when you purchased the property. You agreed to abide by all rules and regulations set forth by the HOA board." I had signed it, of course. Like most buyers, I barely glanced at the dense legal document my realtor had assured me was standard stuff. Another irony, considering how many times I'd ruled on cases where someone hadn't read the fine print. "I'll pay the fine," I said, deciding this wasn't worth the argument. "Oh, it's not just about the fine anymore," Patricia said, her smile growing wider. "You're also trespassing." That word hung in the air for a moment. "I'm sorry, what?" "According to Section 12.3, Any homeowner with 2 or more violations within a 30-day period loses their right to utilize common areas and property access points until violations are resolved and reviewed by the board, she recited from memory. Common areas? I looked around my own front yard. The sidewalk you're standing near is HOA property, she explained with obvious satisfaction. The street, the curbs, even the grass strip between the sidewalk and the street. All common areas maintained by the association. But you're saying I can't use my own sidewalk. Not your sidewalk, she corrected. And technically, you're in violation right now by standing on HOA property with unresolved citations. This was absurd. I'd seen some aggressive HOA enforcement in my years on the bench, but this was approaching parody. I think you're misinterpreting the scope of that section. I began carefully. Are you a lawyer, Mr. Harrison? Patricia interrupted. No, Emma. Then I suggest you don't tell me how to interpret the covenant I helped write, she said sharply. Now, I'm going to give you one opportunity to return to your home and await the formal notice of your violations and the hearing date. The way she said hearing made it sound like a trial, which, in a way, I suppose it was meant to be. And if I don't, I asked, more curious now than angry. I wanted to see how far she'd actually take this. Then I'll be forced to call the authorities and have you removed from HOA property for trespassing, Patricia said, pulling out her phone. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? She held up her phone, finger hovering over the screen. This is my community, and I will not tolerate people who think they're above our rules. The compliance officer behind her was practically salivating, still recording every moment. I thought about explaining who I was. Thought about mentioning that I'd spent 3 decades adjudicating cases exactly like this, and that her interpretation of the covenant was so legally questionable it wouldn't survive a basic motion to dismiss. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity about how far this would actually go. Maybe it was the quiet anger building at being treated like a criminal in my own front yard. Or maybe, after 32 years of measured judicial temperament, I was just tired of people who wielded tiny amounts of power like tyrants. Go ahead, I said calmly. Make your call. Patricia's eyes widened slightly, like she hadn't expected me to call her bluff. Except it wasn't a bluff. She actually dialed. Yes, I need police assistance at 847 Willow Creek Drive, she said into the phone, her voice taking on a dramatic, frightened quality that hadn't been there seconds before. There's a man trespassing on HOA property who is refusing to leave. He's being aggressive, and I feel threatened. That last part was pure fabrication. I've been nothing but calm, standing in my own yard holding a garden hose. They're on their way, Patricia announced after hanging up, looking triumphant. You might want to go inside now, before this gets worse for you. I think I'll wait right here, I said, crossing my arms. We stood there in silence for the next 8 minutes. Patricia kept glancing at her phone. The compliance officer kept filming. I kept standing exactly where I was, on what was legally ambiguous ground at best. When the patrol car pulled up, 2 officers got out. I recognized the younger one, Officer Martinez, though he wouldn't know me. I'd ruled on a case involving his father about 5 years back, a property dispute that I'd settled fairly, I thought. What seems to be the problem here? Martinez asked, approaching with his hand resting casually on his belt. This man is trespassing on HOA property. Patricia jumped in immediately. He has multiple violations and has lost his right to access common areas. I've asked him repeatedly to return to his home, but he's refusing and becoming belligerent. Martinez looked at me, taking in my gardening clothes, the hose still in the grass, my general demeanor of someone who'd been interrupted during a peaceful morning activity. Sir, is this your residence? He asked me. It is, I confirmed. And are you aware that the HOA is claiming you're trespassing? I'm aware that Ms. Moreland believes I'm trespassing, I said carefully, though I dispute both the legal basis for that claim and her characterization of my behavior as belligerent. Patricia's face reddened again. He's been watering his lawn on a non-watering day, she said, her voice rising. And his mailbox is out of compliance. The covenant clearly states. Ma'am, Martinez held up a hand. Let me handle this, please. He turned back to me, and I could see him trying to assess the situation. A man in his yard, accused of trespassing on his own property by an HOA president who seemed wound a bit too tight. Sir, do you understand the HOA regulations regarding the violations she's mentioned? I do now, I said, and I've already agreed to pay the fines and comply going forward. He's still in violation, Patricia insisted. He's standing on HOA property right now. I want him arrested for trespassing. Martinez looked uncomfortable now. This clearly wasn't the kind of call he'd expected. Ma'am, he's standing in his own front yard, Martinez said slowly. The sidewalk is HOA property, Patricia said, pointing. And the grass strip. I showed you the survey maps when you arrived. He has no right to be on any of it with unresolved violations. The second officer, whose nameplate read Chun, had been quiet until now. With all due respect, ma'am, we can't arrest someone for standing in their own yard, Chun said. It's not his yard. Patricia practically shouted. It's HOA common area that he's lost access to through his own violations. She thrust her folder at Martinez. It's all documented right here. The covenant, the bylaws, the survey maps. This is legitimate trespassing, and I expect you to enforce the law. Martinez took the folder reluctantly and began flipping through it. I could see the moment his expression changed when he realized that Patricia's claim, however absurd, might have some technical legal backing in the covenant language. However poorly written and potentially unenforceable that language might be. Mr. Harrison, Martinez said slowly, closing the folder. I'm going to need to ask you to step onto your porch for me. Are you serious? I asked, genuinely surprised they were entertaining this. I just want to avoid any escalation here, Martinez said, and I could tell he hated this. If you could just move onto your porch, which is definitely your property, we can sort this out without anyone needing to go anywhere. It was a reasonable request, diplomatically phrased. But something in me bristled at the implication that I should retreat from my own front yard because an overzealous HOA president had twisted some covenant language into a weapon. And if I don't, I asked quietly. Martinez's jaw tightened. Sir, please don't make this difficult. I'm not making anything difficult, I said. I'm standing in my own yard, having committed no crime, and I'm being told I need to move because someone believes they have authority they don't actually possess. The covenant gives me that authority, Patricia interjected. And if he refuses a lawful order from a police officer, that's obstruction. Chun shot her a look that suggested he was getting tired of her commentary. But Patricia was right about one thing. If Martinez gave me a direct order and I refused, that could become an actual problem. Not because I was trespassing, which was nonsense, but because refusing a police directive, even an unreasonable one, could lead to charges I'd then have to fight in court. My court, technically, though I was retired. The irony continued to pile up. Mr. Harrison, Martinez said, and I could hear the apology in his voice. I'm asking you, please, to step onto your porch. We locked eyes for a moment. He knew this was ridiculous. I knew this was ridiculous. But Patricia had created a situation where refusing could turn a civil dispute into a criminal matter. Fine, I said, taking a step toward my porch. Wait, Patricia's voice rang out again. Oh, this should be good. He needs to be cited at minimum, she said. He was trespassing, we have it on video, and you witnessed him refusing to comply initially. Martinez looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. Ma'am, he's complying now. After refusing a lawful directive from HOA leadership, Patricia pressed. The covenant gives board members authority equivalent to security personnel on the property. His refusal to leave when I instructed him is trespassing, plain and simple. Chin had had enough. Ma'am, we're not going to cite someone for standing in their own yard, covenant or no covenant. Then I want her names and badge numbers, Patricia said coldly. Because I will be filing a complaint with your supervisor for failure to enforce the law. And there it was. The threat that made every officer's day more complicated. The complaint that would require paperwork, explanations, and potential headaches with their sergeant. Martinez's expression went flat. My name is Officer J. Martinez, badge number 4-7-2-9, he said in a monotone. Officer L. Chun, badge 4-6-1-3, Chun added with barely concealed irritation. Thank you, Patricia said sweetly, making a note in her folder. Now, are you going to do your jobs? Or do I need to call your supervisor directly? Martinez looked at me again, and I could see him calculating. A complaint about not enforcing an HOA covenant dispute, or arresting a man for standing in his yard. Neither was a good option, but one created way more paperwork than the other. Mr. Harrison, Martinez said, his voice professional now, all the sympathy gone. I need you to provide identification, and then I'm going to have to ask you to come with us to sort this matter out at the station. I reached for my wallet slowly, making sure both officers could see my hands. Years of watching police interactions had taught me exactly how to move to avoid any misunderstandings. I pulled out my driver's license and handed it to Martinez. He glanced at it, then looked at me more closely. Something flickered across his face, recognition maybe, but he didn't say anything. He just walked back to the patrol car to run my information. Patricia stood there with her arms crossed, looking satisfied. The compliance officer was still filming everything. Chin remained nearby, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable with how this was playing out. You know this is going to end badly for you, Patricia said to me, her voice low enough that only I could hear. You can't just move into a community and ignore the rules we've all agreed to follow. I haven't ignored anything, I replied quietly. I watered my flowers and had a mailbox that was slightly off. Hardly criminal behavior. It's the principle, she said. If we let one person break the rules, soon everyone will. That's how neighborhoods fall apart. That's how property values decline. She said it like she genuinely believed she was protecting something important, like she was a guardian of civilization itself, standing between order and chaos. All over 2 inches of mailbox height and some water on a Tuesday. Martinez returned with my license. His expression was different now, more careful. Mr. Harrison, he said slowly, can you tell me your occupation? I'm retired, I said. Retired from what? Martinez pressed. Patricia was watching this exchange with interest now. I was a circuit court judge, I said simply. The words hung in the air for a moment. Chin's eyes widened. Martinez's jaw tightened. And Patricia's satisfied expression began to crack, just slightly. Judge Harrison, Martinez said, his voice taking on a different tone entirely. You ruled on a property case for my father about 5 years ago. The boundary dispute with his neighbor. I remember, I said. Your father was right about the fence line. The survey was clear. Martinez nodded slowly, then looked at Patricia. Ma'am, do you understand who you just accused of trespassing? I don't care if he's the governor, Patricia said, though her voice had lost some of its certainty. The rules apply to everyone equally. That's what makes them fair. The rules, I said, finally letting some of my professional authority seep into my voice, are only as valid as their legal foundation. The covenant is legally binding, Patricia insisted. A covenant is a contract, I replied. And like any contract, it's subject to limitations. Restraint of trade, unconscionability, violations of public policy, and overreach of authority. I don't know what any of that means, Patricia said, but she was gripping her folder tighter now. It means, I continued, that just because something is written in a covenant doesn't make it enforceable, especially when it attempts to restrict access to property in ways that contradict statutory rights. Martinez and Chun were watching this exchange like spectators at a tennis match. Are you saying the covenant is invalid? Chun asked carefully. I'm saying that certain provisions in this covenant are likely unenforceable, I clarified. Particularly Section 12.3, which Ms. Moreland is attempting to use to deny me access to portions of my own property. It's not your property, Patricia said, but her voice had gone up an octave. The sidewalk, the street, the grass strips, those are all common areas. Maintained by the HOA, yes, I agreed. But access to them can't be restricted in a manner that effectively imprisons a homeowner in their own house. That's called an unreasonable restraint, and it violates basic property law. You're twisting things, Patricia said. I'm explaining things, I corrected. Something I did professionally for 32 years. Martinez cleared his throat. Your Honor, he began, then caught himself. I mean, Mr. Harrison. Sir, what exactly do you want us to do here? It was a fair question. I could tell them to leave, that this was a civil matter and not appropriate for police involvement. That would be the reasonable thing to do. But Patricia had escalated this beyond reason when she called the police on a man watering his flowers. "I want you to do your jobs," I said, which means assessing whether an actual crime has been committed, not enforcing an HOA covenant dispute that belongs in civil court. "There's been no crime," Chun said immediately, looking relieved to have an out. "This is clearly a dispute over covenant interpretation. We can't arrest someone over that." "He was trespassing," Patricia said, but the conviction was draining from her voice. "Ma'am," Martinez said, and I could hear the patience wearing thin. "Judge Harrison has a valid point. This is a civil matter. If you believe he's in violation of the HOA covenant, you need to pursue that through the proper channels. Civil court, mediation, the hearing process outlined in your own bylaws." "I am pursuing the proper channels," Patricia insisted. "I called you because he was trespassing after I revoked his access rights." "You don't have the authority to revoke someone's access to public sidewalks," I said. "That requires a court order, which requires due process, which requires an actual hearing where I can present a defense. Not a kangaroo court run by an HOA board." Patricia's face had gone from red to pale. "Are you threatening me?" she asked. "I'm educating you," I replied. "There's a difference." "We're done here," Martinez said, handing my license back. "Mr. Harrison, you're free to go." "Ma'am, if you have concerns about HOA violations, file them through your standard process. But we can't help you with this." Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. "So he just gets away with it?" she asked. "Gets away with watering flowers?" Chin said, not bothering to hide his sarcasm anymore. "Yeah, I think we'll let that one slide." The officers returned to their patrol car, and I heard Martinez say something about paperwork as they drove away. Patricia stood there, still clutching her folder, the compliance officer still filming beside her. "This isn't over," she said to me. "You'll have your hearing. The board meets next Tuesday evening at 7. Your violations will be formally addressed, and the fines will stand." "I'll be there," I said, "and I suggest you bring someone who actually understands property law." "I wrote the covenant," Patricia said. "I know exactly what it says." "Knowing what it says and understanding what it means are two different things," I replied. "But you'll learn that next Tuesday." She turned on her heel and marched back across my lawn, leaving small divots in the grass from her heels. The compliance officer followed, still filming. I picked up my garden hose and finished watering my roses. The next 6 days passed quietly. I reviewed my copy of the HOA covenant, all 87 pages of it, making notes in the margins. I pulled up case law from a state Supreme Court on HOA authority and restrictions. I contacted my former clerk, Sarah, who is now a practicing attorney, and asked her to look over a few sections. "This is insane," Sarah said on the phone after reading through the document. "Half of these provisions wouldn't survive a basic challenge. Did anyone actually review this before they implemented it?" "Apparently not," I said. "Who wrote this thing?" According to the title page, a committee headed by Patricia Moreland. "The woman who tried to have you arrested?" "The very same." Sarah laughed. "She has no idea what's about to hit her, does she?" "I suspect she's going to find out," I said. Tuesday evening arrived. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a bland rectangular building at the entrance to the neighborhood. I arrived at 6:55 p.m., wearing a suit for the first time since my retirement party. Old habits. The main room had about 30 folding chairs set up in rows. A table at the front held 5 chairs for the board members. About a dozen residents were scattered throughout the room, looking bored or annoyed or both. Patricia sat in the center chair at the board table, flanked by 4 other people I didn't recognize. She looked up when I entered, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, that I'd actually shown up. Or concern, seeing me in a suit instead of gardening clothes. "Mr. Harrison," she said as I took a seat in the front row. "Glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied pleasantly. The meeting began at 7 sharp. Patricia called it to order with a gavel that seemed unnecessarily large. They went through the standard agenda items first. Approval of last meeting's minutes. Treasurer's report showing the association's finances, which seemed surprisingly healthy. a discussion about repaving the tennis courts, a complaint about someone's garbage cans being visible from a street. I watched Patricia work. She ran the meeting efficiently. I'd give her that. She knew Robert's rules of order, more or less. She listened to residents speak, then promptly dismissed most of their concerns with references to various covenant sections. She wielded that covenant like a shield and a sword simultaneously. After 40 minutes of general business, Patricia cleared her throat. Now we come to new enforcement matters, she announced. Specifically, case number 2025-047, violations by the homeowner at 847 Willow Creek Drive. All eyes turned to me. Mr. Harrison, Patricia continued, you've been cited for 2 violations. First, mailbox height discrepancy of 2 inches below regulation standard. Second, unauthorized water usage on a restricted day. The total fines amount to $300, payable within 30 days. She looked at me expectantly. Would you like to address the board regarding these violations? I stood up slowly. I would, I said. But first, I have a question about procedure. Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of question? According to Section 15.2 of the Covenant, any homeowner facing fines over $100 is entitled to a full evidentiary hearing with the opportunity to present witnesses, cross-examine evidence, and be represented by counsel, if desired. Is that correct? Patricia glanced at her copy of the Covenant. That's technically correct, but this is just a standard violation. We don't need to make it complicated. The law doesn't care about convenience, I said. If the Covenant guarantees certain procedural rights, then those rights must be honored. Otherwise, any decision you make tonight is void. One of the other board members, a man in his 60s with white hair, leaned over to Patricia and whispered something. She shook her head. Mr. Harrison, we're trying to run an efficient meeting here. If you just pay the fines, we can all move on. I'm not paying the fines, I said clearly, because I don't believe they're valid. A murmur went through the small audience. Patricia's grip on her gavel tightened. The violations are documented, she said. We have photographic evidence. We have witness testimony. The Covenant is clear about the restrictions. The Covenant is clear about a lot of things, I agreed, including my right to a proper hearing, which I'm invoking right now. Fine, Patricia said, clearly annoyed. You can present your defense. Please keep it brief. Oh, I'll keep it very brief, I said, pulling a folder from my briefcase. Because my defense isn't about whether I watered my flowers on a Tuesday or whether my mailbox was 2 inches too low. My defense is about whether this board has the legal authority to enforce those rules in the first place. Patricia's expression shifted. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that your covenant, as written, violates at least 7 different state statutes regarding HOA authority and homeowner rights. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. For example, Section 4.7, which restricts water usage to specific days. That directly contradicts State Code 44-291, which prevents HOAs from restricting essential water usage for landscape maintenance necessary to prevent property damage. I held up the statute printout. My roses are establishing root systems. Restricting water during that period causes permanent damage to the plants and, by extension, to my property value. The state legislature has already decided that HOAs can't do that. Patricia's face had gone pale again. That's not. We've always had water restrictions. Having them and enforcing them legally are 2 different things, I said. Just like your attempt to restrict my access to sidewalks last week. That violates State Code 44-276, which prevents HOAs from denying access to common areas in any way that substantially interferes with an owner's reasonable use of their property. I pulled out another document. Then there's the issue of your fine structure. $300 for minor violations? State Code 44-305 caps. HOA fines at $50 per violation for aesthetic or maintenance issues that don't pose health or safety risks. The white-haired board member was reading over Patricia's shoulder now, his expression growing more concerned. Furthermore, I continued, your enforcement process itself is problematic. You sent me violation notices without providing any information about how to appeal, without offering mediation, and without following the graduated enforcement process required by your own bylaws. I looked directly at Patricia. You skipped straight to fines and police involvement because you wanted to make an example of me. But in doing so, you violated my rights as a homeowner and exposed this HOA to significant legal liability. The room was completely silent now. Are you threatening to sue the HOA? One of the other board members asked nervously. I'm pointing out that the HOA is currently operating in violation of state law, I said. What you do with that information is up to you. Patricia had recovered some of her composure. If you're such an expert on HOA law, then maybe you should have read the covenant more carefully before you bought here, she said. Oh, I've read it very carefully now, I assured her. All 87 pages, and I found quite a bit that concerns me. I pulled out another set of documents, thicker this time. For instance, did you know that the covenant was last updated in 2019, but it was never properly filed with the county recorder's office? Which means the current version isn't actually legally binding on any homeowner who purchased after that date. Patricia's eyes went wide. That's not true. I filed it myself. You filed an amendment, I said, checking my notes. But according to county records, the base document you were amending was never properly recorded in the first place. The original covenant from 2003 is on file, but your 2019 update, which contains most of these enforcement provisions, isn't. The white-haired board member had gone pale too now. Patricia, is that true? He asked. I don't. I filed everything properly, she stammered. I'm sure you thought you did, I said, not unkindly. But property law has very specific requirements for recording documents. And if those requirements aren't met, the document isn't valid. I set the county records on the table in front of the board, which means that roughly 60% of the rules you've been enforcing for the past 6 years, including the water restrictions and the mailbox specifications, have no legal standing whatsoever. The room erupted. Residents who'd been sitting quietly were suddenly talking over each other. Someone shouted about fines they'd paid years ago. Someone else demanded to know how much money the HOA had collected illegally. Patricia was staring at the county records like they might bite her. This is ridiculous, she finally said, her voice shaking slightly. You're just trying to get out of paying legitimate fines. I'm trying to ensure this HOA operates within the law, I corrected. Something it hasn't been doing. We'll have our attorney review this, Patricia said. I'm sure there's an explanation. I'm sure there is, I agreed. And I'm very interested to hear it. In the meantime, I'm formally disputing these fines and requesting that all enforcement actions against me be suspended pending a legal review of the covenant's validity. You can't just... Actually, under Section 15.4 of your own bylaws, I interrupted. Any homeowner who raises a substantial legal question about the covenant's enforceability is entitled to a stay of all penalties until the matter is resolved. That's your rule, not mine. Patricia looked at the other board members, but they were all staring at the documents I'd spread across the table. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. Your fines are suspended pending review. Is there anything else? Just one more thing, I said. I'd like to formally request copies of all HOA financial records for the past 6 years, all board meeting minutes, and all enforcement actions taken against homeowners. That's my right under state transparency laws governing homeowner associations. Patricia's hands were shaking now. That will take time to compile. You have 30 days under the statute, I said. I'll expect the documents by November 15th. I closed my folder and picked up my briefcase. Thank you for your time this evening, I said to the board. I look forward to our next meeting. I walked out of the community center into the cool October air. Behind me, I could hear the meeting dissolving into chaos, multiple voices arguing over each other. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Sarah. How'd it go? I smiled and typed back. I think I just became the most popular and most hated person in the neighborhood simultaneously. As I walked back to my house, I noticed lights coming on in windows. People checking their own copies of the covenant, probably. People realizing they might have been paying invalid fines for years. People understanding that everything was about to change. I'd retired to get away from courtrooms and legal battles, to spend my days in peace, tending roses and reading books I'd never had time for. But Patricia Moreland had made a critical mistake. She'd assumed I was just another homeowner she could bully into compliance. She didn't know that I'd spent 3 decades fighting for what was right. And I hadn't forgotten how. I reached for my wallet slowly, making sure both officers could see my hands. Years of watching police interactions had taught me exactly how to move to avoid any misunderstandings. I pulled out my driver's license and handed it to Martinez. He glanced at it, then looked at me more closely. Something flickered across his face, recognition maybe, but he didn't say anything. He just walked back to the patrol car to run my information. Patricia stood there with her arms crossed, looking satisfied. The compliance officer was still filming everything. Chin remained nearby, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable with how this was playing out. "You know this is going to end badly for you," Patricia said to me, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You can't just move into a community and ignore the rules we've all agreed to follow." "I haven't ignored anything," I replied quietly. "I watered my flowers and had a mailbox that was slightly off. Hardly criminal behavior. It's the principle," she said. "If we let one person break the rules, soon everyone will. That's how neighborhoods fall apart. That's how property values decline." She said it like she genuinely believed she was protecting something important. Like she was a guardian of civilization itself, standing between order and chaos. All over 2 inches of mailbox height and some water on a Tuesday. Martinez returned with my license. His expression was different now, more careful. "Mr. Harrison," he said slowly, "can you tell me your occupation?" "I'm retired," I said. "Retired from what?" Martinez pressed. Patricia was watching this exchange with interest now. "I was a circuit court judge," I said simply. The words hung in the air for a moment. Chin's eyes widened. Martinez's jaw tightened. And Patricia's satisfied expression began to crack, just slightly. "Judge Harrison," Martinez said, his voice taking on a different tone entirely. "You ruled on a property case for my father about 5 years ago. The boundary dispute with his neighbor." "I remember," I said. "Your father was right about the fence line. The survey was clear." Martinez nodded slowly, then looked at Patricia. "Ma'am, do you understand who you just accused of trespassing?" "I don't care if he's the governor," Patricia said, though her voice had lost some of its certainty. "The rules apply to everyone equally. That's what makes them fair." "The rules," I said, finally letting some of my professional authority seep into my voice, "are only as valid as their legal foundation." "The covenant is legally binding," Patricia insisted. "A covenant is a contract," I replied. "And like any contract, it's subject to limitations. Restraint of trade, unconscionability, violations of public policy, and overreach of authority." "I don't know what any of that means," Patricia said, but she was gripping her folder tighter now. "It means," I continued, "that just because something is written in a covenant doesn't make it enforceable, especially when it attempts to restrict access to property in ways that contradict statutory rights." Martinez and Chun were watching this exchange like spectators at a tennis match. "Are you saying the covenant is invalid?" Chun asked carefully. "I'm saying that certain provisions in this covenant are likely unenforceable," I clarified. "Particularly Section 12.3, which Ms. Moreland is attempting to use to deny me access to portions of my own property." "It's not your property," Patricia said, but her voice had gone up an octave. "The sidewalk, the street, the grass strips, those are all common areas. Maintained by the HOA, yes," I agreed. "But access to them can't be restricted in a manner that effectively imprisons a homeowner in their own house. That's called an unreasonable restraint, and it violates basic property law." "You're twisting things," Patricia said. "I'm explaining things," I corrected. "Something I did professionally for 32 years. Martinez cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he began, then caught himself. "I mean, Mr. Harrison." "Sir, what exactly do you want us to do here?" It was a fair question. I could tell them to leave, that this was a civil matter and not appropriate for police involvement. That would be the reasonable thing to do. But Patricia had escalated this beyond reason when she called the police on a man watering his flowers. "I want you to do your jobs," I said. which means assessing whether an actual crime has been committed, not enforcing an HOA covenant dispute that belongs in civil court. There's been no crime, Chen said immediately, looking relieved to have an out. This is clearly a dispute over covenant interpretation. We can't arrest someone over that. He was trespassing, Patricia said, but the conviction was draining for her voice. Ma'am, Martinez said, and I could hear the patience wearing thin. Judge Harrison has a valid point. This is a civil matter. If you believe he's in violation of the HOA covenant, you need to pursue that through the proper channels. Civil court, mediation, the hearing process outlined in your own bylaws. I am pursuing the proper channels, Patricia insisted. I called you because he was trespassing after I revoked his access rights. You don't have the authority to revoke someone's access to public sidewalks, I said. That requires a court order, which requires due process, which requires an actual hearing where I can present a defense, not a kangaroo court run by an HOA board. Patricia's face had gone from red to pale. Are you threatening me? She asked. I'm educating you, I replied. There's a difference. We're done here, Martinez said, handing my license back. Mr. Harrison, you're free to go. Ma'am, if you have concerns about HOA violations, file them through your standard process. But we can't help you with this. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. So he just gets away with it? She asked. Gets away with watering flowers? Chin said, not bothering to hide his sarcasm anymore. Yeah, I think we'll let that one slide. The officers returned to their patrol car, and I heard Martinez say something about paperwork as they drove away. Patricia stood there, still clutching her folder, the compliance officer still filming beside her. This isn't over, she said to me. You're absolutely right, I replied calmly. It's not over, because tomorrow morning, I'm filing a formal complaint with the state HOA regulatory board about your enforcement practices. I'm also requesting a full audit of your covenant's legal compliance. Her face went pale. And I'll be attending your next board meeting with a list of every statutory violation I've found in your covenant. All 37 of them. 37, she whispered. That's just for my initial review, I said. I'm sure I'll find more once I do a deeper analysis. Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing to say. You wanted to make an example of me, I continued quietly. You wanted to show the neighborhood what happens when someone doesn't fall in line. Well, congratulations. You succeeded, just not in the way you planned. I picked up my garden hose. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to finish watering my roses. And I'm going to do it on whatever day I choose because your water restrictions violate state code and are unenforceable. Patricia turned and walked away without another word. The compliance officer followed. The camera finally lowered. I watered my flowers in peace. 3 weeks later, the HOA held an emergency meeting. Patricia Moreland resigned as president, effective immediately. The board hired an actual attorney to review the covenant, who confirmed that roughly 60% of their rules were legally questionable at best. They refunded nearly $40,000 in improperly collected fines to homeowners going back 3 years. And they rewrote their enforcement procedures to actually comply with state law. I never did pay those $300 in fines. Instead, I joined the HOA board as the new legal compliance officer. Someone had to make sure they didn't make the same mistakes again. My roses thrived, watered on whatever schedule they needed. My mailbox stayed exactly where it was, 2 inches lower than Patricia's arbitrary standard. And I learned that retirement didn't mean stepping away from justice. Sometimes justice found you in your own front yard. Sometimes it came disguised as an overzealous HOA president who didn't know when to back down. And sometimes the best way to enjoy your retirement was to remind people that rules only matter when they're built on solid legal ground. I never did get that peaceful retirement I'd imagined. But watching an illegal HOA operation crumble under the weight of its own overreach, that was more satisfying than any garden could ever be. Patricia moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later. I heard she joined a different HOA in the next town over. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. But mostly, I just hoped she'd learned her lesson about assuming she knew more than a judge about the law. Because the law isn't about power. It's about what's right. And no covenant, no matter how thick the folder, can change that. Patricia Moreland thought she was protecting her neighborhood. She thought strict enforcement and iron-fisted control would keep property values high and standards intact. But what she was really doing was operating an illegal shakedown, collecting fines based on rules that had no legal standing. She'd bullied dozens of homeowners over the years, made them pay hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars for violations that were never valid in the first place. All because no one had the knowledge or the courage to challenge her, until she picked the wrong neighbor. The lesson here isn't just about HOAs, though they can absolutely abuse their power when left unchecked. It's about standing up when something isn't right. It's about knowing your rights, understanding the law, and refusing to be intimidated by people who wield minor authority like a weapon. Patricia moved away, but the neighborhood is better for what happened. The HOA operates legally now. Homeowners know their rights. And my roses? They're thriving. Sometimes retirement means stepping away from the fight. But sometimes the fight comes to you. And when it does, you better make sure you know who you're fighting. Because you never know when the person watering their flowers might be the one person who can take everything you've built and reduce it to rubble. One illegal covenant at a time. Thanks for watching. If you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, drop your story in the comments below. And remember, subscribe for more stories about karma, justice, and people who got exactly what they deserved. See you in the next one.